Now, let's have a look at what's grabbing the headlines here in France. Lots of focus, in fact, on that late-night discussion flow. Parliament extending the state of emergency for 6 months now.
That's right. It's a huge story in the French press. The measure will now be debated in the Senate, but lots of papers are focusing on that vote that took place in the lower house of Parliament, the Assemblée nationale. So a majority of MPs from, of course, the Socialist Party, but also the opposition voting in favor of extending the state of emergency. Le Monde reports that the Prime Minister, Manuel Valls, just a couple of hours before this vote took place, repeated warnings that France essentially had to brace itself for more terrorist attacks, more innocent people killed. France must never get used to this, but we must learn to live with this threat, live with it, and fight against it.
Now, members of the opposition, they did join the government, didn't they? They did back this proposal, but they didn't quite get all the compromises they were after, did they?
That's right. I was telling you about this yesterday. The opposition was hoping that the government would put in place a series of security measures in return for their support. You can see here Le Figaro's take on things, talks about a thin compromise, a minimum of these security measures were adopted. Now, the opposition argues that just extending the state of emergency isn't enough, and it seems like even the government, or some members of the government, agree with this. The Interior Minister, Bernard Cazeneuve, for instance, he said that, extending the state of emergency is necessary, but it's not necessarily going to stop new attacks.
Now, of course, the state of emergency here in France has already been in place for 9 months, in fact, now. The exceptional measures being put in place, they're still subject to quite a lot of debate, aren't they?
That's right, and not just here in France, because Libération is focusing on this today, and they say, across the world, there's a temptation to take a major security turn, if you could call it that way, and a security turn that, would curb other freedoms. And you can see Libération asking this question, is this really what we want? Do we really want such a full-fledged security turn? And inside, Libération takes a closer look at what it calls this fantasy of security at all costs. The situation is really ripe for this, for several reasons. People are scared, that's something that's very clear, but also we're in an electoral period, and so everything is pushing politicians to give in, to fall into this security trap. But Libération says, this is a trap, and it really warns against having this temporary fix that is the emergency, the state of emergency, become something long-term. And Libération points something out that's very interesting, is that the state of emergency will be re-examined in 6 months, but in 6 months' time, we are going to be right in the middle of a presidential campaign, for the election, and so don't bet that this state of emergency will be stopped in 6 months.
Yeah, the communist paper L'Humanité really agreeing with Libération on this. They even take it a little bit further, though, don't they?
That's right. L'Humanité does not mince its words today. Let's take a look at their front page. You can see the permanent state of emergency is a danger for the Republic. These exceptional measures that have been put in place for quite some time now, they didn't allow authorities to stop the killing in Nice. The Nice killer wasn't even on the radar. It's deceptive, according to L'Humanité, for authorities to tell people that, security and freedom can't go hand in hand. All this undermines the very pillars of our society, of our democracy, and essentially it just serves the ISIS propaganda machine.
Let's talk about the French people, though, because a majority of French people, they do seem to be actually backing the government's security turn. They're actually even calling for more firmness from the authorities, Flo.
That's right. That's what Le Parisien is looking at. If you look at polls in the last couple of days, it's clear French people are angry, they're sick and tired, and they no longer trust the government to fight against terrorism. The country is on edge. You can see here, attention à la colère qui monte, careful because anger is growing. And this is a very interesting photo. What you can see here is actually, I guess what you could call it is an improvised anger pile on the Promenade des Anglais, essentially a place where people can let off steam. You can see here they've written lâche, that means coward. They've also thrown all sorts of trash here. Le Parisien is worried about this growing anger. Could the country really split apart this time? That's what it wants to know. There are fears that things could really spiral out of control with different communities fighting against each other. If we take a closer look at the cartoon there in Aujourd'hui en France, you can see this angry guy saying, "I'm so angry, I feel like killing someone." And the woman there saying, "Calm down, or else ISIS will claim responsibility for that murder." so dark humor there in Le Parisien that you can also find in Libération. If we take a look at a cartoon in Libé, you can see an ISIS spokesman here saying, you can kill anybody and we'll ensure that we claim responsibility for your attack. And that young guy there saying, wow, that's a great idea.
Yeah, a lot of papers are alarmed by what they call a rise in hate here in France.
That's right. And La Croix, the Catholic paper, has really a moving plea today. You can see their front page here, contre la haine, against hatred, and a very different picture taken on the Promenade des Anglais. Two people hugging here. La Croix interviews philosophers about, how to recognize and accept, on the one hand, this anger, this fear, but also how to not, have it spiral out of control. Because after all, our social cohesion and peace itself is really at stake in the next, coming time here in France. Now, Le Monde, if we go back to Le Monde, they have another solution. To understand each other, it's important to read. And it's a really beautiful tribute to the power of words, the power of reading, how it makes you understand the world around you, feel, compassion for other people, understand the complexity of the world, and also provide a much-needed silent escape that we need these days.
Some emotional stuff in the papers today, wasn't there, Flo? Flo Wilmer, who's been looking through the French newspapers for us on France 24. She'll be back in a couple of hours' time looking through the international papers as well. More news.